Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and welcome to the show, y'all. Look here. Man, look. Mom's is home. She's home, and she's got that look on her face that her daughter is all familiar with. And her daughter realizes that her mom already knows. She really believes that she already knows what's going on, that she's lied to her. And, she's never really lied to her mother. And when I say that, I mean, if she asked and said, do you want another piece of cake? You know what I'm saying? And she told her yes. She said, is your stomach hurt? She might say no, but her stomach might be hurt. A little lie like that. You understand what I'm saying? But she's never lied to her mother about anything of consequence. And now she's starting to feel a certain way because she's looking at her mom and she sees in her mother's eyes something that no child wants to see. And that's disappointment. That's hurt. Real pain. And she connects to her mom in a way that only a child can when they realize that they have disappointed their parent. And she thinks about what to say. With her young mind, 11, 12-year-old mind, she can't seem to get the words right of what it is that she needs to say that I'm sorry to her mother. So Paul, he looks out of his peripheral and he sees that she's struggling. And he sees that her lip is starting to quiver and her eyes are starting to fill with tears. And he says, baby, I need to tell you something. I know that you told me that I didn't need to be out here selling any drugs and doing all of these types of things, but I have been. And I know you are against that. And for that, I apologize. And on top of that, I hid him in this apartment. And for that, I'm sorry too. And then he turned to his stepdaughter and he said to his stepdaughter, he said, and I owe you an apology too. And she looked up at him with tears in her eyes and her lips quivering because she was afraid of what, was about to be said. And she didn't know what was about to be said. And her mom was looking at her and her mom, she was starting to tear up too, right? And she said, it's going to be okay. And she put her arm around her daughter and, excuse me, and Paul said, I know you found the drugs that I had hidden in this apartment. And I should have never had them in here. And at that moment, she buried her head in shame in her mother's arms. And her mother wrapped her up with the embrace that only a mother could give. And she knew what Paul was doing. She knew that Paul had decided to take all of the weight on him because he realized, excuse me, y'all, he realized that he was the problem here. He realized that if not for him, none of this would have happened. None of it. So he felt it was only right for him to take all the blame for what was happening. And he did. And he did that. So as he continued to talk, he directed what he was saying more so to his stepdaughter because he wanted her to know that what he did was wrong on so many different levels. And he pointed it out. I should have never agreed. Rather, he said, we should have never lied to your mother. And by me agreeing to that, you felt it was okay. Now, her head is still buried in her mother, right? So she's not even looking at him, but she's crying and her body is quivering, because she's crying so hard. And he puts his hand on her back and he tells her it's okay. Because I made you feel like that it was okay to do. And it's not. It's not okay. And I don't want you to think that it's okay. But he said that ain't on you. It's on me. Because I'm the adult. You're the child. And you should never lie to your mother. Never. You should never lie to your mother. And she continued to cry. And when Paul was finished, he stood there for a few seconds. And the mother, as a mother would, she looked down at her daughter, and her daughter looked up at her, with tears running down her face and her nose snotty and lip quivering. And she said, in that voice that a mother would say when she's trying to soothe you, at the same time teach you a lesson, she said, "Is it anything you got to say to me?" And she took her hand and she put it on her chin and she tilted her chin back up when she tried to look down, and she said, "Baby, ain't nothing you can do to lose my love." She said, "I loved you when I first felt you inside of me. And nothing you can do is going to change that. But see, what you need to say to me is more for you than for me. Because if you don't say what needs to be said right now in this moment, it's going to bother you for the rest of your life. And I don't want you to be bothered by this, because I want you to be happy. All you got to do is say it." And she looked at her mama all confused, and she knows what she wants to say, but she's unsure about what to say. And she said, "What am I supposed to say, Mama?" And her mama said, "Repeat after me." And she sniffled and like that and wiped her tears from her face, and she said, "Say, I'm sorry, Mama." And she looked up at her mother. Tears just started streaming down her face, and she said, "I'm sorry, Mama." And she just burst out to crying. And her mama burst out to crying, and Paul burst out to crying, and he tried he tried to hug him, have a group hug. She said, stand over there. She said, I'll deal with you later. She said, stand on over there. She said, this is our moment. And that's what that was. It was a special moment between a mother and a daughter, because in that moment, she wanted her daughter to know that nobody is going to come between them. No man, no drugs, no lies could ever come between them. And her daughter understood that in that moment, that lesson. She fully understood that. And she told her to sit down at the table, and she was going to fix her something to eat. And she didn't say another word about it for the rest of the night. Not to her daughter. So Paul, he'd been sitting on the couch. She took him a plate. He'd been sitting on the couch just looking silly, not knowing what his future held. He didn't know if he was getting put out that night or what, But he sat on the couch and he's watching TV, and he felt good about what he had done, but he was also nervous about what might be coming. Don't nobody want to get put out. Even if you tell the truth, you own up to it, right? You still want to live in a nice warm place. He ain't had nowhere to go. Straight out the penitentiary. And now, the daughter, she's gone to bed. And Paul and his woman, they sitting on the couch, and she sits down beside him and she says, "And what should I do with you?" And he looked at her and he said, "I'm sorry, Mama." And she said, "That ain't gonna work for you. That ain't gonna work for you. You're not a child. You knew better." And she told him, she said, "Look, if I let you stay, you gotta promise never to do anything like that again." And she said, "You're gonna quit selling this dope. You're gonna get this stuff out this house. And don't ever bring it in this house again. And matter of fact, like I say, don't even be trying to sell it again. She said, I'm not putting up with that. If you want to be with me, you're going to be with me, struggling or not. It's not about money. Because I don't want my daughter to end up like a lot of these people out here. No scruples, no morals, not knowing what she should do and how she should live her life. I'm not going to have that around her. And Paul, he understood all of it. He sat there and he's listening to her, and he started to feel like he was the luckiest man in the world. Because he had found a woman that had the courage to tell him the right thing at risk of losing everything. Because what was more important to her was doing the right thing by her daughter. So Paul, he sat there beside her, and she said, what you got to say about that? And he said, there's nothing to be said other than I'm sorry. And he got up and he went into the room. He had already gotten all the weed and stuff. He went up and got in the room and got the weed, brought it out. And he took it and he said, come here. She walked behind him. He opened it up and he flushed it. Flushed it all down the toilet. Made sure it was all flushed down the toilet. And she looked at him. And the first thing she said is like, do you owe anybody for that? He's like, nah. She said, well, you better find you a job tomorrow because we still got bills to pay. And he understood that. He understood that. And he said, I'm on it. She said, no more than just putting in applications. You take what you can get. She said, somebody will hire you. She said, I know how this thing go. You probably ain't really been trying to get a job. And she said, but you got to change that. We got to set a good example. Now, look, check this out. That's when he looked at it. He said, look, all right, you done beat me up enough. Because he still had to reassert that he's a man. He's a man. He said, you done beat me up enough. I get it. And everything that I did, I am truly sorry for. Now, it'll never happen again. But can we move on now as a family? She was like, yeah. As long as you do the right thing. Mainly by my daughter. As long as you do the right thing. And he agreed and he hugged and he kissed her and they made love that night. And the next day he got up and he straight out the door going to find a job. And he found a job. Construction job. Honest, hard work. And he worked there for a long time. And his stepdaughter, she grew up, never got involved in drugs again, never involved herself with anybody that was involved in drugs again. And her mom was happy. Everything was fine. Everything was working out just fine. And then her mom, one day, got sick. She went to the doctor. And she had been diagnosed with cancer. And the doctor said it was bad. Not fatal, but bad. And they could treat her. And it was going to take some time. So she would have to be off work. And it scared her daughter. Scared her. She's a full-fledged teenager at this point. You know what I'm saying? 15, 16 years old. And she's afraid about what her future holds. She's afraid. So her real dad comes back around. And he wants to be a part of her life. And he's a hard-working person, honest, square type dude. Never really been involved in anything like it. He was just a deadbeat dad, going through some things back then and not really focusing, got his life together, and now he's trying to come back into her life and want to show her that he's changed. Look, everybody deserves a second chance as long as they're genuine about the situation, and owning it and claiming it and taking full responsibility for what they've done, you know what I mean? So when he comes back around, he wants to be very, very, very supportive to his ex and his daughter. But see, Paul is feeling some type of way about it. And when she's, laying in the bed sick, she can tell that Paul is concerned about it. And he's wondering about, what does this mean for them as a couple? And he's wondering, what does this mean for them as a family? Because his stepdaughter, she's really starting to want to be around her father. She'd never been around him. That's natural. And the more she's around him, the more she starts to want to be around him. And Paul is feeling a little insecure about that. And, his girl can tell. So even when she was in the bed sick, going back and forth with the chemo treatments, she was reassuring him. And then she told him, she said, if anything happens to me, I want you to raise our daughter. And he tells her she might not want to be with me. She might want to be with her father. And she told him, she said, you're her father. Yeah, he's her biological father, and he has a right to spend time with her, but he hasn't been here. And I've already got the paperwork done. You're going to be the guardian. Now, there might be some issues later, but you're going to be the guardian. So later that night, she called her daughter into the room and she was talking to her, she had just come from visiting with her biological father. And she told her daughter what her plans were in case something went wrong. And her daughter panicked because she's like, are you not telling me something? And she said, no, I just want you to know that if something goes wrong, that Paul is going to be your guardian. He's going to continue to raise you. And she looked at Paul and without hesitating, she said, who else would raise me? He's my dad. He's my dad. And I wanted to tell you this story because, you never know the situations that you're going to come from, especially any of you out there that's listening to the show that have come out of prison and found yourself in situations like that. Be right. Be good to the people that you inject yourself into their life. If you become a part of somebody's family and are fortunate enough to raise or be a part of raising somebody's child with them, appreciate that, man. Whether you're a man or a woman, appreciate that. Don't take it for granted because you're going to be influencing that young mind. You're going to be influencing that young person. Do right by them because you may end up being the one that has to raise them. You never know what's going to happen. So don't play. Don't play like that. Either be in or be out. And when you're in, be genuine. Okay? This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.
I'm getting so tired.